George, it's a pleasure to be at your home today doing this interview. Today is April the 6th, 2008. I'm going to begin by giving you my name. It's George A. Parrish. I live in Burlington and have lived here since I returned from service in World War II. The beginning of my Army service, I was in the draft in 1942, but I wanted to be a member of the Air Corps, so I volunteered and was bused from Durham with another group of volunteers to Camp Croft, South Carolina, induction center. We were prepared there for uniforms and equipment and so forth, and tested for different phases of the service, and was chosen as an air mechanic school inductee, but shipped to Miami Beach, Florida for our basic training. And this was on the beach itself. We were housed in the hotels there that had been conscripted for service training, and there was no such thing as having a good time there. But we spent about 5 weeks there. From Miami Beach, we went to Amarillo, Texas, a brand new base that was just opened for air mechanics school. Air mechanics was the necessary training that all ground crew received, as well as the flight crew members that were in the mechanical area. From the school, we learned different techniques, whether it be hydraulics, electronics. Very little electronics, but most of it was electrical. We did the training from the engines right on through the airframe and the airstrip. We also graduated from air mechanics school in the latter part of 1942, and was shipped to Boeing Aircraft Factory in Seattle, Washington, who was the manufacturer of the B-17, and spent about 6 weeks there in what we call a refresher or a updated course. From air mechanics school, we graduated and was assigned to the gunnery school, which was flight training and gunnery, primarily firing at targets being towed behind another airplane, learning the technique of flying windage, leading the target or whatever, because of the fighters when they would come into the firing on the plane, they'd be at different elevations of different directions, and therefore you'd have to consider leading as you would be firing at a bird. From flight training, gunnery school, we were assigned to Moses Lake, Washington State, and formed a crew. The B-17 requires 10 crew members. The 10 crew members are the pilot, the co-pilot, the navigator, the bombardier, the flight engineer, and the radio operator, the radio operator's assistant, the flight engineer's assistant, the armorers, and of course the tail gunner. The armorer is one of the men that flies the ball turret, which is underneath the plane. And my responsibility was flying the upper turret, which is the top turret, and be accessible for the pilot and co-pilot for transferring fuel and different tasks that's required during the flight. We proceeded through 3-phase trainings. One was phase 1 at Moses Lake, phase 2 at Pendleton, Oregon, and then back to Walla Walla, Washington, and completed our in the States training. We were shipped to Wilmington, Delaware, to be flown overseas. Our plane was taken away from us. Just to let you know that we had a little problem with the Major League ball game was going on in New York, Yankee Stadium, and 3 of the crews from a flight ahead of us had buzzed this Yankee Stadium, and they landed in Presque Isle, Maine, but the people in charge was disappointed with their actions, and it got the tail numbers, and so they grounded the pilots, and we were flown over to Presque Isle to take those planes over, but they decided that they would not ground them and would not court-martial them because they were needed so badly in the European theater that they fined them and sent them on overseas. Therefore, we were left there at Presque Isle, Maine without a ship. We'd already been, our ship had been taken away. We left the States on a C-54 transport with a bunch of full colonels and generals headed to North Africa for the North African campaign. They were just as courteous as they could be. They're just regular people, and here we were, sergeants and second lieutenants, merging in with this group of 19 high-ranking officers. We arrived in England. Another thing, the federal government gave us 10 cases of cigarettes. We had disposed of some of our uniforms and so forth to get it in our barracks bags. And here I didn't smoke. And when we got to England, we traded a case of cigarettes. Mind you, a case of cigarettes is 144 cartons for a meal. We wound up with several cases of cigarettes with the 10 of us. And I decided, well, if I was going to fly combat, I'd just as well start smoking. So I did start smoking along with my one pack a day ration for the week. And I began to smoke quite heavily and smoked until sometime in the mid-70s, which I quit. After arriving in England, we went into what we call the wash for further training, and then of course for the disposition center, and was assigned to the 91st Bomb Group Heavy B-17 Flying Fortress Group, Bassingbourn, England. This was on or about mid-September 1943. In preparatory training prior to our flights, we were in ground school, and aircraft recognition school, link trainer training, and so forth, and we decided to participate and learn as much as we could due to the fact that we had to fly as a crew, as a team, and in doing so, we were assigned an airplane, which we named it the Buckeye Boomerang. The Buckeye Boomerang name came from my pilot, whom was from Ohio, the Buckeye State. The first Buckeye Boomerang that we flew, or the first mission we flew in the Buckeye Boomerang, was to Bremen, the subpens in northern Germany on the North Sea. And we did several trips in the Buckeye Boomerang, that number 187, the tail number. And in doing so, we were doing great until January the 11th, 1944, when our 1st Division was dispatched on a bombing mission down to the southern part of France, to Offenpfaffenhofen, which is a German city near the Pyrenees Mountains. En route, we were involved with fighter attacks all the way down through the target, and on the return trip until we got to the French coast and the waterway between England and France. En route to the base, it had iced over the runways, and we were diverted to another airstrip, and we crashed that plane on an icy runway and ran into a huge revetment of dirt at the end of the runway and destroyed it beyond repair. Fortunately, we were not injured. We were issued another plane. We named it Buckeye 2. Buckeye 2 was flown several missions by our crew as well as another crew, but was lost with another crew over the continent of Germany. Later, during the month of April, we were assigned another B-17, but it was the first all-silver, non-painted airplane that came into our group. It was a B-17 that was not named, and on April the 13th, 1944, General Dwight D. Eisenhower came and christened that plane the General Ike. The General Ike was a good, dependable aircraft. It survived the war. We finished most of our missions with the General Ike. It was a good lead aircraft because it was so solid. It wasn't too fast. It wasn't too slow. And when I say that, some planes, even though they all look alike, are not good lead planes because they can outmaneuver the others, and it's like on the end of a whip. If you're the end of the whip, you're lagging way behind, and that's what we don't need in a 60 plane formation in aircraft. We flew many missions. My total missions was 35 credited. I actually flew 31 because when we first started flying, they promised us that we would only have to fly 25 missions and then we could come home. But the air crews were lost so great. The great loss of air crews was so severe that at that time the United States Army Air Corps Services considered discontinuing daylight bombing and start bombing at night as the British did. But they continued to do that. When we'd have groups of forts, and when we'd lose 60 in one mission, that meant 600 men failed to return, and 600 aircraft was lost, and we just couldn't survive that type of losses during the time. And the crews were trained to where that we were a team. The team had to work good together. It's like a basketball game. The team effort. There cannot be one outstanding individual on that crew that surpasses the others. All of them have to work as a team. And they are brothers. We loved our brothers just like we loved our own kin. We lost some of our crews. One of our upper turret gunners was shot, and he was discharged from service because his leg was severely wounded. We lost a bombardier with another crew because he was one mission behind us and wanted to catch up. He was shot down. They went to Switzerland, was interned for the rest of the war. We lost a ball turret gunner because of the same reason, but we never know what happened to him, other than we just know that they lost the crew, and the last time it was visible was going into the cloud bank. Never heard anything about them, haven't been able to find out anything about what happened to that crew. During the latter part of my missions, we had the D-Day invasion. I was not scheduled to fly on D-Day because we were a lead crew and we only flew every 6 missions. But General Gross, the air commander for the 1st Division, wanted to go and observe the D-Day landings. That was June 6, 1944. And we got a skeleton crew with a training ship with no guns, flight engineer for myself, a navigator, an observer, a co-pilot, and a captain of the group commander was the pilot, and the general was the co-pilot. We observed our group dropping the bombs the morning of D-Day. The overcast was 100%, it was cloudy, it was raining, and after the bombs dropped, General Gross instructed the pilot, let's go down on the deck and see what's going on. It was called an unauthorized mission. The general called for the unauthorized mission. The pilot says, what do you mean? We're not scheduled for this. He said, we are scheduled because I said so. Well, we descended, and in doing so, the navigator gave us a heading, and we came out 800 feet above the beachhead. And I want you to know that the naval guns were blasting off the water into the shore batteries. The shore batteries was blasting at the naval guns and all the other invading troops. And we decided we better get out of there because we could hear shrapnel hitting our plane all over, and we decided to leave. So we did, but later General Gross got a dressing down, I understand, from the commander above his responsibility. So that was an unauthorized mission that I didn't get credit for, but I flew the mission anyway. That was D-Day, June 6, 1944. After finishing my missions, I was scheduled to continue to stay in the European theater and check out new crews as they come into the group. But 8th Air Force cut orders and sent me home for training in B-29s to go to the Pacific Fleet Theater to bomb Japan. But as I came into the States, I was assigned to the Louisville Convalescent Hospital for a condition of psychoneurotic. I stayed there until about March of 1944 and was shipped to Boca Raton, Florida, but in the meantime they had decided that they didn't need any more B-29 crews in the Pacific, and therefore I stayed there until the war was over in Japan, because the war was over in Germany sometime early part of the 1945. So it's just really fortunate that we did not have to do anything in the way of invade that island of Japan, because I don't think we'd ever accomplished it. Japan was far advanced than we, because Germany had passed a lot of their technology to the Japanese, the jets, which was far surpassed what we were able to put in the air in the way of speed, some 100 miles an hour faster, and it's extremely good. We just needed to continue to work as a team. It is so important that each individual know his own job and do his job and work together. And with 13 50 caliber guns on those ships, by the time you had a 60 plane formation, it was real heavy firepower when a German fighter would come in, but that didn't deter those Germans from doing it. They were good, smart, quality airmen, and they lost thousands and thousands of 109s and FW-19s, and we lost many of our small fighters. We call them little friends. We just really worried from day to day about